Almost 10,000 farmers are supported by WFP through our program. So farmers are trained on good agricultural practices, post-harvest handling, and eventually our hope is that these skills will help them to increase the produce, the quality of their produce, and sell to schools nearby their farms.
Impamvu ntekereza numva abanyeshuri bose babonye ibiryo bitaraza barivagamo ngo kubera inzara y'ibiryo bagasinzira ntibakurikire amasomo.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Eric Mitchell. I'm the Executive Director for the Alliance to End Hunger. And before I begin, I would like to thank our partners at World Food Program USA for making today's event possible. Their team has been fantastic to work with, and I look forward to future collaborations in the weeks and months coming. I would also like to thank our friends at the Global Child Nutrition Foundation, Kellogg's Company, and the World Food Program for agreeing to participate in today's event. Finally, I would like to thank our friends and colleagues on Capitol Hill, as well as other organizations and stakeholders for tuning in today. This meeting is being recorded and it will be made available after the event. As you listen to these expert panelists today, we encourage you to please ask questions or provide comment through the Q&A chat features. You know, the reason why we are all here today is that we understand the importance of childhood nutrition. Ensuring proper nutrition for school-aged children not only allows kids to excel in their studies, but provides a needed boost to their future health and the prosperity of their families and communities. But while we know the advantages that school meals can bring to communities around the globe, we're also learning about the toll that a global crisis can have on this progress. The COVID-19 pandemic has taught us much about both the strength and fragility of feeding programs and safety nets, as well as unfortunate inequalities in recovery. I, like many of you, am really looking forward to a discussion today that both highlights the benefits of school meals and also dives into the resiliency of these programs in the face of adversity. Now, I would like to turn things over to Barron Segar, the President and CEO of WFP USA, for a few special remarks.
Hello, everybody. I'm Barron Segar, President and CEO of the World Food Program USA, and I'm so pleased to welcome you all to today's event. I'd like to extend a special thank you to our partners and co-hosts today, the Alliance to End Hunger, Kellogg Company, and the Global Child Nutrition Foundation. The UN World Food Program is the largest provider of school meals, and school feeding is one of our most critical programs and one that is personally dear to me. There's no better investment than investing in the health, education, and future of a child. As students head back to school, school feeding is a priority issue for the UN World Food Program and all of us here today. I recently had the opportunity to make my first trip to the field as President and CEO of the World Food Program USA, visiting WFP's programs in Guatemala and Honduras. I saw firsthand the importance of programs such as these, which prevent children from facing hunger and malnutrition. Prior to the pandemic, school feeding programs were reaching about half of all school children on the planet, roughly 388 million people in 168 countries. When the pandemic struck, it forced school closures, depriving millions of children from school meals that they relied on every single day. At that time, we mobilized quickly with our partners on the ground to provide alternatives, and now our focus is on restoring school feeding to pre-pandemic levels. We're joining forces with other NGOs and dozens of countries, including the United States, to formally launch the Global School Meals Coalition in just a few weeks. This partnership will not only help get school feeding programs back up and running, but expand to reach even more children around the world. I look forward to a panel's discussion today, which includes my colleague, Carmen Burbano, the head of the school feeding program at the United Nations World Food Program, and the World Food Program USA's own Chief Advocacy and Engagement Officer, Rebecca Middleton, and other very esteemed guests. I hope you consider joining our organizations to support this very, very important cause.
Thank you, Barron, for your comments. And before we turn it over to the panelists, I want to first present special remarks by someone who has a special place in our community and in our hearts. Congressman Jim McGovern represents the 2nd Congressional District of Massachusetts. He's been representing for over 25 years. And during that time, he's been a stalwart champion for food security and nutrition issues, both in the United States and around the world. We are always thankful for his partnership in fighting for programs that combat hunger. And here are his remarks.
I want to thank everyone who has joined us today for this important briefing on the benefits of global school meals. I especially want to thank the World Food Program USA, the Global Child Nutrition Foundation, the Alliance to End Hunger, and the Kellogg Company for hosting today's briefing and bringing together an extraordinary set of panelists. I'm a strong supporter of nutrition programs that focus on the first 1,000 days of a child's life. We all know malnutrition and undernutrition during those first 3 years can stunt and harm a child's development for a lifetime. But a child's life is not a competition. It's a continuum. And malnutrition, undernutrition, and food insecurity must be addressed throughout childhood and adolescence. As the father of a son and a daughter, sometimes I thought the only things my kids ever did was eat, sleep, and grow out of their clothes. I know how important eating well and nutritiously was for their own growth and their own development. So I'm particularly grateful to see more studies on the first 7,000 days of a child's life and the role nutrition and food security plays in their ability to learn, grow, develop, and contribute to their communities. Nutritious meals are central to consolidating the gains of early childhood development and to addressing critical phases of growth throughout their youth. As many of you know, the George McGovern Robert Dole International Food for Education and Child Nutrition Program is America's signature global school feeding program. It promotes education, child development, and food security for some of the world's poorest and most vulnerable children. The World Food Program and U.S. NGOs have implemented a diverse array of McGovern-Dole programs over the past 18 years. In over 40 countries, these programs have made a difference in the lives of more than 44 million children, their families, schools, and communities. Before the global COVID-19 pandemic, an estimated 400 million children suffered from chronic hunger and over 130 million were not attending school. This only worsened during the pandemic. Schools closed and children lost access to nutritious meals, education, and fundamental health interventions. According to UNICEF, more than 39 billion school meals have been missed, affecting almost 400 million children. McGovern-Dole's implementing partners were quick to identify and carry out home and community meal deliveries, along with health and nutrition interventions. People might begin talking about a post-COVID-19 world, but as the Delta and other variants illustrate, we will be living with COVID and its after effects for a while longer. This is especially true in poor and developing nations where recovery is likely to be slow and uneven. So I'm eager then to hear from our panel about not just the benefits of school meals, but how we can best target resources now to ensure a better future, one where all of the world's children not just survive, but thrive.
Thank you, Congressman McGovern, for your friendship and partnership with our community. And thank you so much for your comments. It is important for us to not only provide the resources for our children that they survive, but also that they can thrive. I will now turn things over to my good friend and colleague, Rebecca Middleton. Rebecca is the Chief Advocacy and Engagement Officer for WFP USA. And previous to her role at WFP, Rebecca has built an advocacy career on and around Capitol Hill, most recently in the position that I'm sitting in now. She served as the Executive Director of the Alliance to End Hunger. Rebecca, I will turn things over to you to introduce our panel.
Thanks so much, Eric. And it's really great to be here with you today. I have to say, when we started talking about this panel, oh gosh, late spring, early summer, I know we were all hoping that we would be together in person. Not quite there yet, unfortunately, but I look forward to that day. And I'm really grateful to be here virtually with all of you in the audience and with this fantastic panel. Just a couple of housekeeping items. We're going to start out with some prepared questions for the panel. I'll run through those, but really what we're looking for today is your questions. What do you want to hear from this group that we've got together? So I think everyone's used to the drill by now, but just in case, I'll give a brief refresher. Please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to submit questions for the panel. And we'll filter those on our end and make sure we've got plenty of time to consider those as we get through the time here. We've got about another hour, so I think that we should have plenty of time to hear and both from the panelists and from the audience. So we'll jump right in. I believe Nate McGrath from the Alliance is going to drop the full bios in, but the panel today, this was our dream team when we started planning this, and I really am impressed that we were able to pull it off and get a time that worked for everybody. So we have Carmen Burbano, who is the head of school feeding at the World Food Program in Rome. Stephanie Slingerland, who's a longtime friend and senior director of philanthropy and social impact at Kellogg Company in Michigan. And Heidi Kessler, the Senior Program and Operations Officer at the Global Child Nutrition Foundation in Seattle. So 10 o'clock was the magic hour to be able to include Rome and Seattle without it being too much of a hardship on anyone. So the first question, and this is for all of the panelists, as both Barron and Representative McGovern mentioned, with the pandemic shutting schools around the world, school feeding programs were forced to quickly adapt. Love it if each of you could share some of the best practices you've seen during the last year and a half. And are there any lessons learned that should carry forward post-pandemic? So Carmen, we'll start with you.
Well, thank you so much, Rebecca, and really thank you and congratulations to everybody that put this conversation and this panel together, and also thanking Congressman McGovern for that amazing kickoff speech. It was I think he really helped us to frame this conversation, and specifically about the issue of COVID. We saw last year the effect that closing down schools can have on children. At some point last year, 90% of all children were at home and did not have access to their schools. And in that, did not have access to a lot of services, among those, one of the most important safety nets, which is school meals. We saw really quickly how governments started to pull together solutions, alternatives. So in many countries, the meals got converted into what we call take-home rations. So that was one of the solutions that governments found. In others, really creatively, they started pooling resources. So where they were providing meals, they also combined that with cash transfers to make sure that children and their families were tiding over through the pandemic and had additional support. As we started looking and seeing how the education systems started to come back online, there's been another set of practices, including figuring out how to stagger meal times, for example, have children eat in their classrooms so they don't agglomerate in a dining room or somewhere like that. Including or improving infrastructure in schools to make sure that there's hand washing facilities, make sure that there's social distancing and all of that. And I would say also taking advantage of the platform that these programs provide to provide, for example, COVID awareness messages to children, to give other kinds of inputs like soap and other things. So there has been very creatively a picture of how governments have reacted. But I would say the big lesson that we take from this whole experience, Rebecca, is that nothing replaces schools being open. And one of the things that we are very much focused on this year and for years to come is working with governments to open their school systems as soon as possible. And when they do, to restore access to these vital programs, because even as governments really tried very hard to put in place mitigation measures, none of it compares to that school being open, that child being at their desk and learning, and also having access to these meals.
Thanks so much, Karen. Really appreciate that. So Stephanie, over to you. I know you come at this from a little bit different perspective, but I also know that Kellogg's has been really engaged and involved with healthy school meals for quite some time. So would love if you could share a bit of what you all are seeing from some of the partnerships that you have around the country and around the world.
Yes, thank you so much. As you noted, we have been a supporter of ensuring that kids are fed and fulfilled, sort of echoing what, Representative McGovern said there for many years. And, certainly as Carmen noted, seeing things that we never thought we would see in the last 18 months. But we've just been so amazed by our partners, including World Food Program and others on the ground who've continued to be innovative in helping to make sure that children are getting access to nutrition. And I think, I would commend everyone working in this space on how committed they are to ensuring that kids are still getting access to food. We have heard stories, everything from teachers getting in boats and going down rivers and handing out rations to students, to, in my own neighborhood, the school bus drivers coming around and dropping off parcels to families to ensure that they're getting the meals that they need. And, appreciative of all of the efforts that everyone and the magnitude of figuring out these things so quickly, right? In the matter of just a week, things are starting to shut down and we have to figure out how to get meals to kids. So just been, amazed by the resilience of our partners in doing so. But, I'll echo what Carmen has said, that nothing replaces those kids being in school and getting those meals there. And so, as Kellogg, we are coming alongside partners in events like this and in other opportunities where we can partner with you all to advocate for those schools to get back in session, and how we can continue to expand these important programs, because we know how critical they are for childhood well-being, not just their physical well-being, but their social and emotional well-being as well.
Thank you, Stephanie. Heidi, what would you like to add as far as some of the adaptations that have taken place, and also what looks really promising as we go forward? And are there some best practices even as we return to in-school?
Thank you. When I think about the creative food procurement and distribution methods that have been implemented in the past year and a half, I think it's important to recognize the new and expanded partnerships that have allowed this to happen. And the one that I think is worth highlighting today is the relationship between school and food banks. Food banks are positioned to collect surplus food and redirect it to the people in need, and they do a very good job at that. As schools closed and families lost income, food banks remained open, and they found themselves with the surplus food that may have been headed to other markets that were suddenly closed because of the pandemic. At the same time, schools know where vulnerable students live. They have buses and they have transportation routes. So at the same time, food banks can serve not just the students, but they can also serve the family. In some cases, food banks use schools as pickup locations, which helped utilization because schools are a trusted and safe place for families who may not have previously considered utilizing a traditional food pantry before. And food banks are doing more than just providing food in their partnerships with schools. So one food bank in Mexico, who was a member of the Global Food Banking Network, really wanted to encourage students to stay in school despite virtual learning. So it requires that students attend available virtual classes in order to receive the benefit. So this is just a simple example of how organizations with common goals can come together to accelerate the progress.
Thanks so much. And I'll just a quick follow-up for you, Heidi. Could you just talk a bit more about some of the food banks? I realize this is more Global Food Banking Network's turf, but you alluded to the one in Mexico. I think a lot of us who are based here in the US aren't familiar with the food bank systems globally. Is that something you could comfortably touch on just a bit so the audience has that context?
Well, what I do know is that food banks are operating in about 80 countries. They are more likely to be found in middle and higher income countries. In many cases, they have already been operating child nutrition programs prior to the pandemic, but the pandemic led to a real opportunity for them to integrate more deeply into the school system and find more synergies and opportunities to leverage each other's strengths.
Great, thank you for that. Didn't mean to put you on the spot, but thought it was a helpful piece of information for us to all share together as we go forward here.
Yes, thank you.
Another question is, Barron mentioned there's a new Global School Meals Coalition that was announced in July leading up to next week's UN Food System Summit. How do each of you see this platform changing the attention on and impact of school meals around the globe? So we'll start again with Carmen.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And we're very excited about this new school meals coalition and in a way the energy that has been created in the Food System Summit as we move forward with conversations. We now have 60 countries that have signed the declaration of commitment to the coalition, and something like 50 partners from UN agencies, NGOs, advocacy groups, et cetera. So the momentum is unmistakable, and also, the interest in this kind of approach is clearly there. And I would say, in terms of opportunities and things to be aware of, it's just incredible how this is really the moment for this issue. For those of us, and here in the panel, I suspect we've been working on school nutrition and school health for decades. This is really our dream come true. I really, truly believe that there's a before and after the Food System Summit, after the coalition is launched. This is a sea change in what we would like to see, especially with governments really taking on board this issue and their leadership and their commitment, which builds on decades of work that they have put in, but really a global recognition. So this is the moment for country level action, for country level commitment. I would say after the coalition is launched, the work really begins in terms of supporting countries and governments to define what their commitments are going to be, what are their vision and their goals for their programs and their children for the next decade or so. So really the big opportunity is at the country level, and partners here listening today, I would just call on them to get engaged in the countries where they're working and support the governments with this definition. But I would say two more things that come up through this coalition that are important. One is that this is really a multi-sectoral discussion. This is not just about education. It's about social protection and how we care for children through social assistance programs. It's about health, nutrition. Of course, this is part of the food system conversation. So it's about how they eat better. It's about how we connect to local markets, what the role of smallholder farmers is, and how these programs can be really multi-sectoral platforms for action. I would say this is a dream come true for the SDG agenda, where we have several SDGs being tackled at once. It's challenging. It's not an easy conversation because it doesn't belong to one sector. It belongs to a lot of sectors. That part of that is very complex. But I would say it's where we need to go. And finally, in that conversation, partnerships. We've seen, and Heidi mentioned, so many partners that make these programs on the ground run, but also at the regional level, really important leadership of global blocs and regional blocs like the African Union, like the European Union and others that are really activating their policy mechanisms to really engage in this conversation to see how we can together reform a new generation of school meals programs that is more sustainable, that is healthier, and that reaches more children, especially the ones that are being left behind now.
Fantastic. Thank you for that overview. So Stephanie, speaking of that multi-sectoral approach, I'd love to hear sort of Kellogg's thoughts, engagement, ideas around this new coalition. So over to you.
Yes, thank you. I would say we are thrilled to see this, to take shape and to take this work to the next level. As I mentioned, we've been supporting and working in the school feeding program for more than 20 years. And helping to support programs, advocate for the expansion of those programs as all part of our broader purpose around supporting food security and hunger relief through what we call our Better Days program. And I think what we've observed in working with partners, World Food Program, Global Food Banking Network is another one of our partners in this space, is that we need more action to take these things to scale. Early on, we've been supporting programs, particularly across Europe. It's Kellogg coming in and helping to stand up the program, and that's great. But we need sustainable long-term solutions that, to Carmen's point, that are going to take these things to scale, and that requires more partners It requires governments, all of us, to come together to help do that. And this coalition is exactly that kind of effort, right? To take these things to the next level. We see the difference in how programs are run, being that we're supporting these types of programs in countries around the globe, how different they can be from country to country. And, where we see, like in the US, for example, strong support behind the programs and continued expansion behind support of those programs that create a more sustainable model to ensure that kids are getting fed and fulfilled. There's some great learnings there that we can take, and this kind of coalition can help really bring those best practices together and help reach even more children. So it's very exciting. We're happy to support it in any way that we can.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. So Heidi, I know you all have a global network of folks working in the school meals space. I'm curious to hear your engagement with this, your hopes for it, how it's sort of intersecting with your day-to-day work at GCNF.
Excellent, thank you. We were very excited to have the School Meals Coalition opportunity brought to the table and brought to countries around the world. The platform is really bringing many middle and higher income countries to the table, which is exciting. And in some cases, we don't know a lot about the coverage of school meal programs in some of those countries. Countries such as Germany and Canada have decentralized school meal programs, and they're run by the states, the provinces, territories, or community organizations. So it can be difficult to determine the exact coverage at the national level. But we hope to work with countries, including those that have decentralized programs, to find creative ways to capture this information so that it can help inform the investments that they'll make for their own children. We also look forward to the lessons that we'll learn from extraordinary programs such as Finland's, that is truly focused on the whole child and has deep integration of nutrition education into the school day. We hope that it will inspire countries to not just join the coalition, but to also do a better job of reaching their own children. One thing that I really appreciate about the coalition is that it's bringing people together under a shared belief that nutrition of school-aged children is of primary importance. It can bring a cohesion and a fellowship that can build upon itself. And we welcome the opportunity to see even more models and actions in action, to hear more success stories, and to have more partners to brainstorm solutions with. It's a really exciting time.
I would agree. Thanks so much, Heidi. So just a reminder before I go to questions I have for each individual panelist, please submit your questions through the Q&A. I see one in there, and I also see one that came through on the chat, which is great. I did catch that. This is for the audience. This is your opportunity to get your questions or even some of your comments out around this really important and engaging topic. And I'm looking forward to how this will be front and center, with some of the announcements out of the Food System Summit next week. So let's start. Stephanie, the nutritional benefits of school meals are obviously front and center. We get the nutritional benefits, we get the educational benefits. But I know Kellogg has spent some time studying some of the additional benefits, the secondary and tertiary benefits that students receive through these programs. So I would love if you could take some time and talk about how Kellogg has been looking at that and working with partners and some of your findings there.
Yes. Prior to the pandemic, I had the privilege of visiting many schools and observing their feeding programs in action. And one of the things that always struck me, certainly, as you mentioned, we know about the health benefits of ensuring kids are getting access to the physical nutrition they need. But so often, I would hear remarks from educators, administrators about some of the other social emotional benefits that students receive from those school meal programs, particularly those that bring students together in the classroom and having breakfast in the classroom. Hearing amazing stories too about, for example, I met a school nurse who distributed meals every morning at a cart to high schoolers that walked in. And she found that because she is the school nurse, sometimes going to the school nurse is kind of a scary proposition, right? You don't know that person very well, but because she was out in front every day handing out breakfast to the kids, people got to know her and they became more comfortable in coming to her because they recognized her from being behind that cart every morning. And so it was helping to address other needs that the students had beyond just making sure that they had a meal every morning. It was those kinds of stories that really struck me. And, hearing other teachers say that eating breakfast in the classroom was akin to the benefits that families have when they sit around a dinner table and eat together and can, talk about their day. So we were really interested in looking at what, beyond the physical nutrition benefits, what are some of the other social and emotional aspects to these feeding programs. So we conducted a literature review. We're going to be releasing the full findings of that here in just a couple of weeks. But to take a look at what research is telling us about some of those other benefits, and some of the things that we found is, particularly we looked at, breakfast programs because we have a history of supporting those, and kids are bonding over breakfast. Some of these programs are helping to deliver a sense of belonging in students, feeling that connection and cohesiveness between their fellow students, between teachers and staff. It's helping to improve classroom behavior. I've heard some great examples of teachers using breakfast every morning to help students feel like they have a role and responsibility within the classroom, whether it's helping to pass out the meals every morning or being on cleanup duty, those kinds of things, and helping to increase awareness of others' needs. And so, we're really excited to release this literature review, as I said, in a couple of weeks, because there's so much more to school feeding programs than just the physical nutrition piece, which is why it's more important than ever, especially as we hear about the impact of the pandemic in terms of emotional well-being. This is another way that we can help students socially and emotionally through these feeding programs, particularly after the tough year that we've just been through.
Thanks, Stephanie. And I think we all saw articles over the last year and a half on the social and particularly the emotional and mental health toll that the pandemic was having on youth. So it's interesting to hear this as a counterpoint as we look ahead and start to get a little more hopeful and optimistic going forward. So Heidi, we're going to switch over to you now. I understand that Gcnf has been providing technical assistance, training, and peer-to-peer learning opportunities on school meals by bringing together heads of state, ministers of education, health and agriculture, NGOs, and civil society for over 20 years. And now you lead the global survey on school meals programs. And so building off of Stephanie's comments on Kellogg's research, what did Gcnf discover in your first survey, and why is ongoing monitoring so important?
Thank you for that question, Rebecca. So in 2019, Gcnf set out to fill a critical gap. We set out to create the world's most comprehensive database of standardized information on school feeding programs by launching the Global Survey of School Meal Programs. In that first survey, 103 countries responded, resulting in tens of thousands of data points covering everything from nutrition and health, financing and governance, procurement and agriculture. We even collect information on the number of jobs created by school feeding programs, the involvement of women, the presence of other complementary activities. So a couple of things that we learned that I think are worth sharing is that average coverage rates increase incrementally with rising wealth levels. That is, national coverage of school feeding programs tends to be lowest precisely where the needs are greatest. And expanded investment continues to be critical, as we know that school feeding is a powerful tool that ensures the investments in health and nutrition that were made in those first 1,000 days are sustained through childhood and adolescence through those first 8,000 days. The next piece I'd like to highlight is that we discovered and confirmed that school feeding programs can drive inclusive economic growth by supporting local agriculture, creating jobs, empowering women and youth. The survey found over 4 million jobs linked with school feeding activities, and we know this is almost for sure to be an underreported number because not all countries are capturing that type of information. We found that the diversity of food baskets increases when food is procured domestically, and therefore more emphasis can be placed on homegrown school feeding programs, which link stable demand with local markets. So the survey identified countries such as Namibia, Cambodia, Liberia, and Guinea-Bissau, all reported recent shifts towards homegrown school feeding programs, which we also know and understand raises the incomes of family farmers. So when I think about why is monitoring so important, we know that data collected from the survey allows countries and funders to direct efforts to the areas of greatest need, to support investments based on deeper knowledge, and to better advocate for resources and to show progress over time. It provides data for relevant research and allows interested parties to compare programs, identify strengths, needs, and trends. And the Global Survey of School Meal Programs can be a cornerstone of the monitoring and evaluation initiative of the School Meals Coalition. We are currently collecting data for the second round of the survey right now. It will capture data that includes a full year of the impact of COVID-19, and every country is invited to participate in this global effort. If you are connected to government representatives, please encourage and support their participation. Participation in the survey is aligned with the interests of countries who have joined the School Meals Coalition. And if you are unsure if your country is participating, please feel free to contact me or reach out to globalsurvey@gcnf.org. We welcome any and all inquiries. Thank you.
Thanks, Heidi. And I have to say, you make it very easy to find information about the survey. It's right on your homepage when you go to GCNF's website. So thank you for sharing about that. So Carmen, the World Food Program does an incredible job, not only leading school meal programs around the world, but also working with countries to help transition those programs from WFP-led country efforts to country-led efforts. Can you share an example or two where that's worked particularly well, and sort of what are some of the keys to success in that transition and sustainability on the countryside?
Well, thank you for that. And I would say this is really an important story that we all have to remember and we have to tell, particularly for the US audience and especially for the huge support that the US provides through the McGovern-Dole program and others, to remember that these investments are sustainable. We have stories and evidence from about 44 countries that the World Food Program has supported through this transition. I would say a lot of the countries in Latin America that now have the stellar school meals programs that we talk about, a lot of them started with WFP support. Many countries in Asia have also transitioned. A lot of these middle income countries at some point in time, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, started with a program very much like the ones we see now in many of the low income countries. So how does this process work? It's a long-term investment. So the transition doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in 2 years or 3 years. It really has to be a sustained partnership between the government, the partners that are funding the efforts, and agencies like WFP, like UNICEF, like NGOs that are really supporting this. What we've seen, for example, in the case of Kenya, which recently is one of our, I would say, more recent examples of what happened. We had been supporting the government of Kenya since the 1980s with some kind of feeding program. And in 2009, the government really got together with WFP and with USDA and others and said, okay, we really want to make this a nationally owned policy and program, part of our system through which we really support our children systematically and in the long term. So a handover process was put in place. That's what it's called. It's kind of like a long-term transition roadmap. And I would say the key to this whole process was the sustained commitment from the US through the McGovern-Dole program throughout that whole cycle. The government started taking over about 500,000 children from the WFP operation. That was quite a large caseload, and that was the beginning of that transition. In 2018, we completely handed over all of the schools and all of the children to the national program. Today, the government feeds about 1.6 million children with its program. It really is a big success story. The government has tripled its allocation of money to school meals from the national budget. At some point in 2009, they were investing $8.5 million. Now they're investing $24 million every year for the program. So this is an example of what can happen. And I would say we have programs at the moment in countries that are in the middle of this transition. Senegal, for example, Cote d'Ivoire, Nepal, Bangladesh are all examples of countries that are on the way to that transition to full national ownership. And we're, as part of our strategy of working with partners and within the coalition, what we hope is that about 25 countries might transition between now and 2030 in this way.
That's so exciting to hear, Carmen. Thank you for sharing that. And that's one of my favorite stories to share too on just what a great investment this is. I think most of the folks in the audience are familiar, but just again, to level set, the McGovern-Dole School Feeding Program was established in the 2002 Farm Bill. It's subject to annual appropriations, and the grants are always highly competitive each year. And just for a sense of scale, in FY20, the total grant amount that were made to different organizations was $215 million. And we are pleased to see in the FY22 appropriations bills that number has gone up quite a bit. And obviously we'll be continuing to tell these great stories as we lead into the 2023 Farm Bill, which feels like we just finished a Farm Bill. It's a little bit, you finish one, you take a breath, and you start on another one. So Carmen, thank you for that. We've got some great questions from the audience that we're gonna start with. And feel free, if any of the answers to these questions inspire additional questions, go ahead and toss them in. I think the one that I'm going to start with, and Carmen, this is for you, but obviously others can jump in, but is from Julie, who says she's excited to hear about the new School Feeding Coalition. How can NGOs get engaged? And realizing this is a brand new endeavor, I know the website's fresh as of a couple of weeks ago, but even if it's aspirational, how do you see NGOs participating as this evolves?
Well, thank you for that. And we have a lot of NGOs already on board. Most of the big players and the big organizations have already signed up, but there's scope for all organizations to join and to participate. So very concretely, and as Rebecca, as you were saying, we are flying the plane as we build it, or building it as we fly it. So it's an evolving process that has mushroomed and kind of exploded within the summit. We are really surprised at how successful the initiative has been. Specifically, in terms of joining the coalition, there is a concept note that all countries have agreed on that has the kind of the agreed objectives and goals that we can share, and also a declaration of support that all NGOs and stakeholders are signing, essentially committing to support governments. It could be at the global level, it could be at the regional level, or at the country level, committing to support them in their objectives and in their goals that they have set for each other, for themselves as well. So the easiest way to learn about this is, first of all, as you mentioned, the website right now is very basic, because we will be launching a full-blown website in a couple of weeks when this initiative is launched at the summit. But there is an email, which is declarations@schoolmealscoalition.org, and I can put it on the chat here. And we could provide all the documentation, including the declaration that needs to be signed. And in that way, you also get access to the newsletter that we're putting out. I should say there's also a Twitter feed, School Meals Coalition, that you can find us at, where you can see a lot of the information and a lot of the links, etc. We need all of the organizations, as many as we can have, because governments are really going to need that support as we move forward.
Stephanie or Heidi, anything to add? I know that one was sort of right down the lane for Carmen. So let's see, I'm scanning the questions here. So Stephanie, one for you. How should business work with government or help solve these issues structurally? And what varies by geography? So this might follow a little bit up on how to get involved with and engage with from the private sector of the School Meals Coalition, but also just generally, how do you get involved? What works the best? And then what are some of the differences you see depending on the region?
Yes, so, I think there's a big opportunity for the private sector to be engaged and help support, these programs. As I mentioned, we've been doing it for more than 20 years with partners like World Food Program, Global Food Banking Network, No Kid Hungry in the United States, and others. Our efforts have really been around helping to ensure that programs have the resources they need to stand up and get those programs started. So even something as simple as not having a milk cart or a cooled case to carry food in, can prohibit schools from starting these programs. And so we've been helping to provide the resources through our partners to ensure that those needs are being met. But again, as I mentioned earlier, without sort of scale behind them and long-term resources to take them to the next level, the programs aren't able to grow and expand. And so that's where something like the School Meals Coalition is very exciting, because you can continue to get the momentum and scale behind these programs to take them bigger. And certainly companies like Kellogg can be a part of that equation in providing resources to help get these things off the ground, and also in advocating for the programs. We've certainly done that in the US, in some markets across Europe, where we've come together with our NGO partners and others to speak to governments about the importance of these programs and what they mean, not only for the children, but thinking ahead to the future, ensuring that those children are fed and fulfilled, help them to realize their future goals and to come to work for companies like Kellogg, right? So, it's so critical that, we think across sectors and coming together to help support ensuring children are fed and fulfilled, because we all have a role to play.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. Heidi, did you want to jump in on this one?
Nope, I think she's got it covered.
Okay, fantastic. We've got another question from Rosanna from South Korea. Wow, it's the middle of the night there. Thanks for making the effort to be on. She's asking about how can student-led organizations collaborate with private sectors or NGOs to fight hunger? They've had some challenges with a program that they were involved with in the Philippines. But I know there's some history of corporations and NGOs working together with students, particularly here in the US with 4-H and National FFA, but curious if you've got good examples of how that works best and what student-led groups should think about in those types of partnerships. Stephanie, do you want to take that one, or Heidi, do you have a good example? Oh, we should have our friends from FFA or 4-H on.
Sorry, Rebecca, can you repeat the crux of your question?
The crux of the question is, how can student-led groups get involved with efforts around school feeding?
So one thing to consider doing is trying to identify the implementing agencies on the ground who are either the NGOs or other partners who are working directly with schools on the ground, and trying to engage at that level, trying to understand the context of whatever region of the world that you're in, whatever country you're in, and trying to find ways to support the efforts that are happening by the implementing agencies would probably be my first suggestion.
Please. I was just going to say, I absolutely agree. And I've seen that work well with certain partners. No Kid Hungry, for example, has done some things in the past where they've, brought students out into the field and gotten them engaged with local programs on the ground, to help, support those efforts. So I absolutely agree, first stop, definitely getting in touch with your local NGO partner and finding the right way to engage.
I also think students and youth have a very powerful voice that is sometimes hard to hear. And so we do encourage them to consider, to continue to speak up, to perhaps participate in advocacy campaigns, to tell their story. What has the impact of school meals been on them? Why is it so important for it to continue? What is the impact on their friends and their peers? So really doing anything they can to elevate their voice. We want to hear it. It is important to hear, and it is impactful. So elevate those voices, keep them coming.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just add that, we had a message on one of our packages last year about our support for feeding programs, and it inspired a 9-year-old boy to start what he called the hunger reliever team in his own community. And he was all over the news. So you're right. Those youth and students have a very powerful voice that they can lend to this conversation.
Thank you both. Stephanie, we've got a question about workforce engagement. And so let me read it. This is from Brad. How has the pandemic affected, for better or worse, your ability to engage your workforce around these important topics? How have employee participation numbers changed as you've had to pivot to a virtual first engagement? And I thinking about a lot of the employee engagement volunteer activities around hunger, both domestically and internationally, that have had to be sidelined or adapted. So how have you all evolved during the past 18 months?
Yes, we certainly have evolved, but I would say what has happened with the changes from employee engagement perspective during the pandemic has really just accelerated what we've already started to see prior to pandemic. Yes, we're all working from home now, and many of us, I think, are hoping to at least, have a better balance of in the office and working from home going forward. But we were already starting to see a transition to that, even to the pandemic, with more people being flexible with their work arrangements. So that certainly impacts employee engagement from being more mindful. We used to sort of have what we call pop-up volunteering activities, where people would show up one day and there would be an opportunity in our atrium of our building and people could engage. We already started to see some waning participation in those kinds of activities simply because people may or may not be in the office. So virtual volunteerism had sort of been something that was on the to-do list for a while, because we do have a lot of employees that already work virtually, if you think about our sales team. And how do we engage them? So we've actually learned a lot these last 18 months that will continue to apply going forward. We have pivoted to a lot of great virtual opportunities. We are seeing employees being actively engaged in those virtual opportunities. I was just talking with the team earlier this morning about one of our popular activities is making bookmarks for kids in our school feeding programs that have encouraging messages on them. So getting creative about some things that we can do at home. But we know our teams are looking forward to the day when we can come back together. We can go into schools and interact with the kids and support the programs. We can go to our food bank partners and support them with their needs. And all of that. Again, I think we're just going to have to be more purposeful about how we do that. And one of the ways that we're thinking about that is we know teams are going to be coming together again post-pandemic. They just might be more strategic, right, about when they do that, given the sort of flexible work arrangements that we're seeing. So how do we continue to embed within our culture that when teams come together, they have a moment of service included within that? So whether it's a virtual engagement option that we can have, or something that a team can go out collectively into the community to participate in, we're sort of working on a playbook that will run the gamut of those things. So I would say we haven't seen engagement from our or interest in engaging in these activities wane among our employees. It's just changed how they engaged and will continue to change as we move forward.
It's really encouraging to hear. Thanks so much, Stephanie. So looks like we've got one audience question left, but I'm going to save that for the end because it's the best one to close with, I think. I've got one more question. And again, for folks in the audience, we do have a bit more time if you want to throw another question or two in the Q&A section. But in the meantime, I would love to hear from each of you. What are the biggest challenges and opportunities you see for school meal program over the next 5 years? And I want to frame that. I get 5 years is a long time for any of us to think about right now. Just some of this is what are we doing next month and the uncertainties around that. But you're looking sort of over the horizon, where are the challenges and opportunities that you're seeing in this space? So we're going to start with Carmen.
Thank you for that. I would say if we're talking about the biggest challenge that we see is that the pandemic and what we're seeing around the world is really crunching government's budgets. And governments are needing to make a lot of very tough decisions of what they're going to fund, what sacrifices are they going to make, where are they going to cut. And so we are looking at education sector budgets being cut. We're looking at more broadly just government budgets diminishing, especially in the low income countries that we're most worried about. So in terms of things that we're watching, we're definitely watching that space. And we're watching how can we help governments find more sustainable sources of financing. We think that both, for example, financial institutions like the World Bank, like the African Development Bank, and all of the regional development banks are really important partners in this area of work. The IMF also, private sector and new sources of funding are going to be really important to help governments weather this storm that's just going to take a while to come out of. So that's, I would say, our major preoccupation and challenge. In terms of opportunities, wow, lots of things coming on the horizon that we're very excited about. One, of course, is we would like to see a lot more kids, especially the ones that were falling through the cracks even before the pandemic. We knew that 73 million children were living in extreme poverty in low-income countries that were not having access to these programs. So with the momentum that's coming through the coalition, through the conversation this year, we would like to see a lot more children having access to these programs in the next few years. And as I mentioned, we would like to see a lot of creativity come online. There's a lot of opportunities with digital technologies, for example, on how these programs can be better monitored. We have a tool that we're just rolling out with the African Union on finding ways for making it easier for governments to decide what kind of food to give their children in schools. So a tool that's combining what's being produced locally, what is the cost of those ingredients, and also what is nutritionally acceptable. If you take those three things and put them in a very complicated app that's taken about 2 years to build, you have a really interesting use of technology to help governments make better decisions that are more cost effective, and that's not, they're not going to break the bank, but they're also going to support these kids with more nutritious food. So I would say innovation is a really important space, and also the opportunity that's coming on board of looking at how can we use these school-based platforms for climate change and more sustainable approaches, including improvements in infrastructure in schools, connecting to better and shorter value chains, looking at carbon footprints of what we're doing and helping governments reform their programs to be more sustainable. So lots of things, I think, coming into the conversation of the problems of the day that these programs can really be at the center of helping us solve.
Fantastic. Thank you, Carmen. Heidi?
So I think one of the most obvious challenges that we are all facing as a globe is the priority of getting kids back to school. And we know that school meals can play a key role in that effort. But as Carmen had said previously, it needs to be a multi-sectoral conversation. It's more than just providing the meals. There needs to be a real campaign to get these kids back in school and to make sure that families understand the full breadth of the services that schools offer, not only in terms of education and health and nutrition, but also for the community in terms of jobs, support of local agriculture, contributions to the overall human capital of a country. As I look into the opportunities, I'd like to circle back to the question that the gentleman asked about how businesses can be involved. And the first thing that comes to mind in businesses trying to support country governments is taking time to establish relationships and do the relationship building that is necessary to engage with that country so that you can fully understand the context. Acknowledging that businesses do have more may be in a position to focus more on innovation than other types of organizations. And I think about content areas such as transportation, fortification, packaging, training in terms of food production and food safety. Those are all opportunities and areas that businesses can elevate in their approach to working with governments as they try to support these efforts.
Thanks so much. And I think that's something that we've seen as an emerging trend is that a lot of it is evolving from sort of a transactional relationships into more of a true partnership, which I think that's accelerating the progress and gives me hope, that's for sure.
Indeed.
Carmen, we already did Carmen. Stephanie, sorry, got thrown off there. 5-year window, challenges and opportunities. What are you all seeing at Kellogg's?
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate what you had actually just said, Rebecca, about partnership. And I think that's another role that, private sector in particular can play as we see some of these challenges and opportunities unfold. How can we come alongside partners and help create and support innovative solutions? I didn't mention as part of my answer on employee engagement, but certainly, for example, skills-based volunteering is something that, we're seeing really be of interest to many of our employees. Yes, coming to the food bank and packing those food packs and those kinds of opportunities are important, but how can people use their specific skill sets to really come up with innovative solutions that can help drive this agenda? I certainly think that that's an opportunity where private sector can play a role. And then, I appreciate what, Carmen had mentioned about challenges that governments in particular are going to be facing with budget challenges and all of these things. And, certainly hope that, we do not see something on the scale of what we've seen with the COVID pandemic for a very, very long time. However, we know there's going to be bumps in the road that's going to happen, whether it's at a country level, regional level, or even at a global scale. So what can we learn from this moment about how we navigated and managed this that we can apply to any future situations so that, 5 years down the road, if, say we have someone who's really a government that's, stepped up and increased their support and funding for these programs, doesn't say, oh, I have to cut back now because of X, Y, or Z. How can we take what we've learned now and apply those learnings to help smooth those bumps in the road going forward?
Fantastic. Thank you on that. It looks like we have gotten through all but the last of the audience questions. It also looks like, not surprisingly, a number of folks had to leave at the top of the hour. So I'm going to do one last question, which I love this question, because we just took a moment to talk about what are we looking at over a 5-year horizon. This question is very specific. It's from Anne, and it says, what are you optimistic about in this coming school year? So just optimistic, just this school year that we're heading into here in the US, realizing school year cycles are different in different places around the world. But what are you optimistic about? And Heidi, we're going to start with you.
There is so much more attention on school meals right now than ever before, and we can leverage that tremendously. There are new partners paying attention. There is new funding. There is new energy. There is new capacity. All of that can be leveraged for the good of our kiddos. When we think about investments in school feeding as not just investments in health and nutrition, but also in human capital, in human capital overall. And when we dive deep into the nutrition and health objective of it, we see that it's not just addressing undernutrition or overnutrition or micronutrient deficiencies, but also other related nutrition challenges of obesity and the cost of nutrition and the general lack of nutrition knowledge and education. We can use this time, this energy and focus that is placed on school feeding right now to elevate actions towards all of those challenges.
Fantastic. Thanks. Stephanie.
Yeah, and I would agree. And I think that there's so much more attention and awareness on what's happened over the last year and how important it is that we can really continue to leverage. We've seen, and thinking of my own experience, the stories on the news about the programs and how, people are being creative and continue to keep these programs going. And I just think it's created a new level of awareness that is exciting, that's helping to fuel this momentum that we can continue to build on. And then, the other thing I would just acknowledge that, from my own personal experience, again, as a mom whose kids were home all last year, I have the newest level of respect for educators, for administrators, and for the food service people who are making this work. I know what it was like when my kids were home for a year, and they're back in the classroom now, thankfully. And, they are at the heart of making all of this work. And I just want to acknowledge them. I know they've been through so much this last year, and so thankful to everything that they're doing to continue to move this forward, and will be such a critical part of the equation as we capitalize on this moment to move forward.
Thanks, Stephanie. Carmen, you get the last word on the panel. What are you optimistic about in the year ahead?
Well, I would say 3 things. One is as Heidi and Stephanie were mentioning, this level of attention that we're seeing to this particular program is really unprecedented. And what I'm looking forward to is the leadership that we're seeing from the highest levels of government, from President Macron of France, from ministers of cooperation of Finland, from President Kagame of Rwanda, President Macky Sall of Senegal. So we're not just talking about speaking amongst ourselves here and getting excited amongst, you know, the UN agencies or the NGOs or people that are already converted. We are talking about leaders that have the power to make decisions, that have the power to make this huge agenda happen. So I would say, as Heidi mentioned, we have never been in a place like this before. We've been working for many, many years, some of us for decades. We're finally at a point where this is really at the top of the priority list, and we're very excited to see what happens next. The other element, of course, is bringing in new partners, bringing in new sectors that have to be at the table, that don't necessarily have that kind of historical presence in this conversation, but that really need to be at the table. Private sector, the agriculture sector, the technology sector. Digital is a really important contribution here. And so we do have an opportunity now to set the table to incorporate all of these new players in the conversation. And finally, let me just say, we have got to get out of this education crisis around the world that is still happening. Millions of children are still not in schools. Millions of countries have not reactivated their education systems. So what I'm really looking forward to is seeing all of those children back in their schools. And let's not forget that meals are part of what they're going to come back to. They're going to, in many cases, their families are going to send them to school because they're going to get meals there, and particularly girls. So I'm excited to see girls come back to school. I'm excited for them to retake and come back to their education. And I hope that by this time next year, we can say, you know, that's behind us. We have all the kiddos back in school. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks, Carmen. And good luck heading into the Food System Summit next week and the full launch of the coalition. I know we're all really looking forward to that. So as we wrap up today, I want to thank all of our panelists. This has really been wonderful to be together, and look forward to being hopefully physically together at some point in the not too distant future. I want to thank the Alliance to End Hunger for, as always, being a great partner on these events and being able to bring together such a great group, both on the panel and online. I want to give a particular thanks too to Congressman McGovern and to his staff for that fantastic video at the intro. He's been such a tireless champion, both on the domestic and international hunger sides for so long. We're grateful for his comments and continued support. And then really thank you to the audience. You know, this is really for you, and look forward to continuing the conversation going forward. I always, anytime we're involved in one of these events, it's like, okay, the event is great, but then what? What's it leading to? And I think we've given you some information, some ideas, and some resources on how to stay connected to this issue going forward. So please connect with each of us, stay in touch, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much to everyone, and have a great one.